I want to tell you about the most painful lesson of my life, one that cost me everything I owned, nearly killed my son, and taught me that sometimes the cruelest thing we can do to someone we love is nothing at all. My name is Barbara Wilson. I'm 73 years old now, a retired bank employee living in a small apartment in Cincinnati. But this story begins much earlier, when I still had a house full of memories, a healthy savings account, and a son I thought I knew. Jason came into my life when I was 35. The doctors had told me it was my last chance at motherhood, so when I held him for the first time in that hospital room in 1967, I made a silent promise. I would give this child everything. My husband Paul and I, we weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. Paul worked as an insurance adjuster, and I'd been with Fifth Third Bank since I was 22. We lived in a nice neighborhood in Mount Adams, the kind of place where kids rode their bikes until dark and neighbors knew each other's names. Jason was our miracle, our everything. We enrolled him in St. Xavier High School, paid for piano lessons even though he hated them, sent him to summer camps in Michigan. He was bright, really bright. His report cards made me burst with pride. By his senior year, he was captain of the football team, had a steady girlfriend named Emily, and got accepted to Xavier University right here in Cincinnati. He wanted to study business management. Paul and I couldn't have been happier. I remember the day we moved him into his dorm in August 2000. It was sweltering hot, one of those humid Ohio days that makes your clothes stick to your skin. Paul and I carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs while Jason charmed his new roommate's parents. He had that gift, making people feel at ease, making them like him instantly. As we drove away that evening, Paul squeezed my hand and said, "We did good, Barb. We raised a good man." For the first year, everything seemed fine. Jason called every Sunday, came home for holidays with bags of laundry and stories about his classes. But during his sophomore year, something shifted. The Sunday calls became less frequent. When he did call, he sounded distracted, rushed. He started asking for money. Never large amounts at first, just $50 here, $100 there. He said textbooks were expensive, that he needed to buy a new laptop for his business courses, that his meal plan didn't cover enough food. What parent doesn't want to help their child succeed? We sent the money without question. Then came March 2003. I was at work, processing mortgage applications, when my supervisor told me there was an emergency call. It was Jason. "Dad's at the hospital," he said, his voice strange and flat. "You need to come now." Paul had collapsed at work, massive heart attack. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. He was only 60 years old. The funeral was a blur. I remember standing at the gravesite in Spring Grove Cemetery, watching them lower Paul's casket into the ground, and feeling like my whole world was being buried with him. Jason stood beside me in an ill-fitting black suit. When had he gotten so thin? His eyes were red, but I didn't see him cry. He kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, checking his watch. I thought he was uncomfortable with grief. I didn't know he was going through withdrawal. After Paul died, Jason became my entire focus. He'd just graduated from Xavier, and I told him to take his time finding a job, to stay at home and save money. The house felt so empty without Paul. Having Jason there made it bearable. He said he was sending out resumes, going to interviews. I believed him because I needed to believe him. But as months turned into years, I started noticing things. Jason would sleep until 2 in the afternoon, then leave the house for hours without explanation. When he came home, he'd lock himself in his room. Sometimes I'd hear him pacing at night, or I'd find him in the kitchen at 4 in the morning, sweating despite the air conditioning, making excuses about bad dreams. His old friends, the ones from high school, the ones who used to fill our house with laughter, stopped coming around. When I asked about Emily, he snapped at me to mind my own business. The money requests became more frequent. He needed cash for gas, for job interviews in Columbus or Louisville, for networking events, for professional clothes. I gave it to him. What else could I do? He was grieving his father, struggling to find his footing. That's what I told myself. I worked at the bank for another 4 years after Paul died, retiring in 2007 at 65. I'd been looking forward to retirement, maybe traveling a bit, visiting my sister in Florida, taking up gardening. I'd saved carefully over 40 years. Between Paul's life insurance, my pension, and our savings, I had just over $200,000. Not a fortune, but enough for a comfortable retirement. One morning in October 2007, I stopped by the bank to deposit my pension check. Martha, one of the tellers I'd worked with for years, had a strange expression when she saw me. "Barbara," she said quietly, "have you been checking your account statements?" I hadn't. I'd been so focused on Jason, on keeping the house running, that I'd let the paperwork pile up. Martha pulled up my account on her computer and turned the screen toward me. My savings account, which should have had over $150,000, showed a balance of $12,000. My hands started shaking. "There must be a mistake," I said. But there was no mistake. Over the past year, there had been dozens of transfers, some to Jason's account, others to cash withdrawals, amounts ranging from $500 to $5,000. I hadn't authorized any of them. I drove home in a daze. I went to my bedroom, to the drawer where I kept my checkbook and savings passbook. They were gone. I opened my jewelry box, the one Paul had given me for our 20th anniversary. The gold watch Paul's father had given him was missing. So was my grandmother's pearl necklace. The diamond earrings Paul had surprised me with for our 25th anniversary, gone. I sat on the edge of my bed, and for the first time since Paul's funeral, I let myself really look at what was happening. Jason hadn't had a job in 4 years. He was 37 years old, living in my house, sleeping all day, disappearing at night. He'd stolen from me. He'd forged my signature, and I had no idea what he was doing with all that money. But part of me did know. I just didn't want to see it. I called a private investigator the next day. His name was Robert Henshaw, a former police detective who'd retired and started his own firm. I met him at a Starbucks in Hyde Park, and I told him everything: the missing money, the strange behavior, the physical changes in Jason. Robert listened without judgment, taking notes. He said he'd look into it and get back to me within a week. He called me 4 days later and asked to meet in person. When I saw his face, I knew it was bad. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, sliding a folder across the table, "your son has a serious drug problem. Heroin. Based on what I've observed and confirmed through various sources, he's been using for approximately 5 years. 5 years. That meant it started in college. While Paul and I were sending him money for textbooks and meal plans, our son was buying heroin." Robert's report was detailed and devastating. He'd followed Jason for 3 days. Every afternoon, Jason would drive to a neighborhood in Over the Rhine, one of the roughest parts of Cincinnati. He'd meet with known dealers, make purchases, then return home. The people Robert saw him with, they weren't his college friends. They were other addicts, other desperate people chasing the same poison. "You need to get him into treatment immediately," Robert said. "And honestly, Mrs. Wilson, you should consider pressing charges for the theft. It might be the wake-up call he needs." I thanked Robert, paid him, and went home with the folder. I put it in my desk drawer and never looked at it again. I couldn't press charges against my own son. He was all I had left. If I turned him in, he'd have a criminal record. His life would be over before it really started. He'd hate me. I'd lose him. So I made a choice. I decided to pretend I didn't know. I kept giving Jason money when he asked. I didn't confront him about the missing jewelry or the forged checks. When he came home glassy-eyed and slurring his words, I told myself he was tired. When I found a burnt spoon in the bathroom, I threw it away and convinced myself it was from something else. I smiled at him over breakfast when he bothered to come down. I told him I loved him. I waited for him to ask for help. He never did. The money kept disappearing. By early 2009, my retirement account was empty. I had to start withdrawing from Paul's life insurance payout to cover basic expenses. My car, a 2005 Honda Accord that Paul and I had bought together, Jason asked to borrow it one day and never came back with it. He sold it for drug money. When I asked about it, he said it had been stolen. I didn't report it to the police because I knew the truth. My neighbors knew too. I could see it in their eyes when I collected my mail or took out the trash. Sympathetic glances, awkward silences. Mrs. Patterson next door once tried to talk to me about resources for families dealing with addiction. I thanked her politely and changed the subject. I couldn't bear to admit out loud what was happening. By 2010, I was living on my modest pension alone, about $1,400 a month. The house needed repairs I couldn't afford. The property taxes were crushing me, but I couldn't sell. Where would Jason live? This was his home. One Tuesday in June, I went to Kroger to do my weekly shopping. I was gone maybe 90 minutes. When I came back, my front door was standing wide open. The living room was destroyed. The flat-screen TV Paul had bought right before he died, gone. My laptop, gone. Paul's coin collection that he'd started as a boy, gone. Even the silverware my mother had given us as a wedding present, gone. The house had been ransacked systematically, professionally. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were looking for. Jason's bedroom door was open. His closet was empty. He was gone. I stood in that violated house, holding my groceries, and I knew it was Jason. I knew he'd done this to his own home, to me, and I knew that everyone in the neighborhood had probably seen him loading my belongings into some stranger's truck, and no one had stopped him because they all knew he was my son. I didn't call the police. I sat down in Paul's old recliner, one of the few things Jason hadn't taken, and I cried, not because of the stolen items, but because I had let it get this far. I had watched my son destroy himself for years, and I'd done nothing but hand him the tools to do it. 3 months passed. I heard nothing from Jason. I filed a missing person report, but the police weren't optimistic. Ma'am, based on what you've told us about his addiction, he probably doesn't want to be found, the officer said. I sold what was left of my jewelry to pay the mortgage. I started shopping at food banks. I kept Jason's room exactly as he'd left it, waiting. Then, on a rainy Saturday in September, 2 police officers appeared at my door. The younger one took off his hat. Mrs. Wilson, your son is at University Hospital. He's alive, but he's in critical condition. I don't remember the drive to the hospital. I remember running through the emergency room doors, giving Jason's name at the desk. A doctor met me, young, maybe 30, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Your son overdosed on heroin, he said. A homeless man found him unconscious in an alley in Northside and called 911. We administered Narcan and were able to revive him, but he suffered significant organ damage. His liver and kidneys are in bad shape. He's lucky to be alive. They let me see him. I walked into that sterile room, and I barely recognized the person in the bed. Jason weighed maybe 120 pounds. His arms were covered in track marks and bruises. His skin was gray. His breathing was shallow. He looked like he was 70 years old, not 42. I sat beside him and held his hand, so thin I could feel every bone, and I finally let myself say it out loud. I failed you. When Jason woke up 2 days later, he couldn't look at me. The doctor explained that he'd need intensive treatment, that the hospital had a program that could help, but Jason would need to agree to go. I expected him to refuse, to make excuses, to lie. Instead, he started crying. Mom, he whispered, I can't stop. I've tried. I can't do it alone." Those words broke me and saved me at the same time. He was asking for help. Finally, after 7 years of hell, my son was asking for help. The hospital referred Jason to a long-term residential treatment facility in Kentucky. It was expensive, very expensive. My pension wouldn't begin to cover it. I had one asset left, the house. I put it on the market in October 2010. It sold within a month for less than it was worth, but I didn't care. After paying off the mortgage and the medical bills, I had enough to cover a year of treatment for Jason. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in Clifton, bringing only what would fit: my clothes, some photos, and Paul's old recliner. Jason spent 13 months at that facility. He went through detox, therapy, group sessions. He relapsed twice during that time. It was agony for both of us, but the counselors kept working with him, kept believing in him, and slowly, painfully, my son started to come back. He's been clean for 3 years now. He lives in a sober living house in Oakley and works at a coffee shop called Sitwell's. He makes minimum wage plus tips. He goes to NA meetings every single day. Twice a week, we have dinner together at my apartment. Nothing fancy, usually just spaghetti or chicken, and we talk, really talk, about what happened, about why it happened, about how we move forward. Our relationship is different now. There's a fragility to it, like a bone that's healed, but never quite as strong as it was. He's apologized more times than I can count for stealing from me, for lying, for all of it. I've apologized too, for not getting him help sooner, for enabling him, for loving him in all the wrong ways. Last month, Jason gave me an envelope. Inside was a check for $200. "It's not much," he said, "but it's a start. I'm going to pay you back, Mom, every penny, even if it takes the rest of my life." I told him to keep the money, to save it for his own future, but he insisted, and I understood why. He needs to do this for himself, to prove that he's not that person anymore. I'm sitting here now in my small apartment, looking at my old checkbook, the only one that survived everything. It's empty, useless. There's no money to write checks against, but I keep it as a reminder of what I almost lost, what I did lose, what I got back. If I could go back to that day in 2007, when I first found out about Jason's addiction, I would do everything differently. I wouldn't protect him from consequences. I wouldn't give him money. I wouldn't pretend that love meant letting him destroy himself while I watched. I would have dragged him to treatment, kicking and screaming if I had to. I would have let him hate me temporarily if it meant saving his life permanently. Because here's what I learned. There's a difference between love and enabling. When your child is drowning, you don't hand them weights and tell yourself you're helping them swim. You throw them a lifeline, even if they fight against it, even if it means they'll be angry with you, even if it breaks your heart. I now volunteer with a support group for parents dealing with addiction. I meet mothers and fathers who are going through exactly what I went through: the denial, the bargaining, the desperate hope that tomorrow will be different without any intervention. And I tell them my story, all of it. The money I gave Jason that went straight into his veins, the years I wasted pretending, the house I lost, the son I almost buried. But I also tell them about the son I have now, the one who shows up for our dinners, the one who's been clean for over 1,000 days, the one who's learning to forgive himself, the one who's alive. Some people say I lost everything, and it's true. I lost my savings, my house, my comfortable retirement. I live on $1,500 a month in a 400 square foot apartment. I shop at thrift stores and clip coupons. But Jason is alive. He's sober. He's working on being whole again. And that means I didn't lose everything. Not even close. The hardest truth I've had to accept is this: my silence almost killed my son. My willingness to pretend, to look away, to make excuses. That wasn't love. That was fear masquerading as love. I was so afraid of losing Jason that I nearly lost him to the one thing I should have fought from the beginning. If you're reading this and you see yourself in my story, if you have a child or a spouse or a parent who's struggling with addiction and you're pretending not to notice, please don't wait as long as I did. Don't confuse enabling with love. Don't sacrifice your loved one's life on the altar of your own fear and denial. Get help. Demand treatment. Set boundaries. Let them be angry with you. Let them call you cruel. Let them say they hate you. Because angry and alive is better than peaceful and dead. I think about Paul sometimes, about what he would have done differently. I think he would have been stronger than me. He would have gotten Jason help the moment we knew there was a problem. He wouldn't have let our son waste away in our house while we pretended everything was fine. But Paul isn't here, and I can't change the past. All I can do is move forward with the truth. My name is Barbara Wilson. I'm 73 years old. I live in a small apartment with very little to my name, and I have a son who is alive and fighting to stay that way. That's my story. That's my lesson. That's what I learned when I paid the highest price imaginable for my silence. Love sometimes means doing the hardest thing imaginable. It means making your child uncomfortable, angry, resentful, because the alternative is watching them die while you do nothing. I wish I had learned that lesson sooner, but at least I learned it in time to still have a son to love.